He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. They want you broken, not because they care, not because they love you, but because a broken thing is easier to control, more predictable, more profitable, and far less dangerous. You've been taught to bleed in public, to turn your wounds into currency, to offer your pain like a performance piece, hoping someone might clap just loud enough for the emptiness to feel like applause. You've been taught to curate your suffering, to shape it into something palatable, something that fits the algorithm, the narrative, the box labeled relatable content. And the more you display your scars, the more you are rewarded, not with healing, not with truth, but with validation from people who never wanted you whole to begin with. Because the moment you stop identifying as the victim, you become unpredictable. You become someone who sees the manipulation for what it is. You become a threat. But here's the truth: Nietzsche choked out in a world that didn't want to hear it. Your suffering is not sacred. It is not your identity. It is not a badge of honor or a moral currency that buys you meaning in a society obsessed with grievance. You don't need to be a victim to matter. You don't need to advertise your pain to be loved. You don't need to collect suffering like a trophy case just to prove you deserve a seat at the table. The culture of victimhood isn't built to liberate you. It's built to keep you soft, bitter, and loyal. It rewards you for staying broken and punishes you for healing. Because a healed mind doesn't beg for permission. A healed soul doesn't wait for validation. A healed person doesn't need an audience to feel alive. They don't want you healed. They want you clinging to your trauma like it's your only personality trait, recycling your worst memories until your entire identity is wrapped in barbed wire, unable to move forward without bleeding. They want you weak because strength is inconvenient. Strength says no. Strength walks away. Strength doesn't participate in the circus. But there's a different path. One carved through silence, not applause. One where you stop performing your pain and start transcending it. One where you reclaim your suffering, not as a label, but as a lesson. So if you're tired of being someone else's sob story, if you're done being manipulated into seeing yourself as powerless, then stay with me. Because in the darkness of your doubt, there's a truth no one wants you to find. And once you see it, you can't go back. You won't want to. And neither will they. They told you that your wounds were the most beautiful parts of you. That pain made you deep. That suffering gave you a voice. And somewhere along the way, you believed them. You made an altar out of your past and started bleeding on cue, thinking that the louder your misery screamed, the more worthy you'd become. But no one told you that staying a victim is the surest way to never leave the cage they built for you. They don't want you to heal. They want you to perform your pain, because as long as you're hurting, you're harmless. As long as you keep crying, you'll never ask to lead. You don't need to be a victim to matter. You don't need to advertise your pain to be loved. You don't need to collect suffering like a trophy case just to prove you deserve a seat at the table. But that's the game they play. Feed the masses the illusion that being broken is identity and healing is betrayal. And the cruelest part, the world claps when you crumble but turns silent when you rise. Because the minute you stop apologizing for existing, the minute you stop narrating your tragedies like a bedtime story, they can't control you anymore. The system profits from your misery. Algorithms reward your vulnerability as long as it's curated, commodified, and looped for consumption. They don't want strength, they want trauma packaged with a punchline. Your breakdown gets more engagement than your breakthrough. And deep down, you know it. That's why healing feels lonely. Because the applause dies when the tears dry. That's why growth feels like exile. Because empowerment doesn't trend. Nietzsche said, "To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. But you were never meant to live in it. You were meant to walk through it and leave. Not decorate your walls with quotes about pain and call it home. You are meant to transform it, not replay it. The world wants you to stay soft, broken, and dependent. But softness without backbone is surrender. Vulnerability without direction is manipulation, and pain without purpose is prison. The moment you start to reject the identity of a victim is the moment they'll call you cold. They'll say you've changed, they'll say you lack empathy, but what they really mean is, you've become untouchable. You've stepped outside the boundaries of control. You no longer feed the machine with your sob story. You've rewritten the narrative, and that makes you dangerous. So ask yourself, who benefits when you remain broken? Who gains when your worth is tied to how much you've suffered? And who loses when you rise? You were never meant to stay on your knees. Stand, even if your legs shake, even if your voice trembles. Because freedom doesn't come wrapped in pity. It comes the moment you refuse to play the part they assigned you. The moment you realize you were never weak, just convinced to act like it. Long before social media feeds were flooded with stories of pain and survival, before the age of oversharing and hashtags, the concept of victimhood was already deeply embedded in the fabric of human society. An idea that philosophers like Nietzsche warned us about, but that we still struggle to shake off. Because victimhood promises something almost seductive. It promises justification, a reason to exist, a shield against the brutal gaze of indifference, but what it truly offers is a cage disguised as comfort. Nietzsche, whose work often dances with darkness and discomfort, exposed this cage, revealing how those who insist on framing themselves as victims hand over their power, not to some external oppressor, but to the very identity they wear, like a shackle, a permanent mark that demands sympathy but simultaneously erodes agency. In ancient times, suffering was seen as a sacred trial, a test from the gods or the universe itself, an ordeal that separated the strong from the weak, the worthy from the unworthy. But over centuries, this spiritual interpretation mutated into a cultural obsession where pain became currency. A token you could spend to gain attention, empathy, or even authority. Yet, paradoxically, it trapped those who held it tight. For the more you cling to your wounds, the less you are able to heal, and the less you are able to transcend the narrative that binds you to a specific role in society. This role is not accidental. It is reinforced through storytelling, religion, media, and now, digital culture, creating a feedback loop where victimhood is rewarded with visibility, and visibility confers validation. But here's the Nietzschean truth we often overlook, the one he whispered in shadows for those willing to listen. That your power lies not in your pain, but in your ability to rise above it, to stare into the abyss of your suffering and refuse to be defined by it, a refusal that requires courage not granted by anyone else, but demanded of you. This courage is the refusal to accept the narrative handed to you, the refusal to play the victim card as your identity or your only means of connection, because in doing so, you surrender the one thing that no one can ever take away: your freedom. Nietzsche called this the will to power, not as a desire to dominate others, but as the inner force that drives you to shape your own destiny, regardless of circumstance. Our modern world, saturated with victim narratives, masks this power struggle by dressing it in empathy. But empathy without empowerment is hollow. It is a gentle poison that numbs rather than heals. And worse, it trains you to seek approval in your suffering rather than strength in your overcoming. It teaches you that to matter, you must display your wounds, turning vulnerability into performance and suffering into a spectacle that both captivates and confines. So, understanding this historical context is not to dismiss or diminish real pain. Far from it, but to illuminate the trap that lies in embracing victimhood as identity. Because history teaches us that the most dangerous kind of victim is the one who never escapes the victim role, who clings to it as a life raft but ends up drowning in it, powerless, unseen for who they truly are beneath the surface of their pain. Imagine for a moment that everything you have believed about yourself, the stories you tell when you whisper in the dark about your pain, your losses, your scars, are not a path to salvation, but a prison designed by your own mind, a labyrinth where every turn leads you deeper into despair, disguised as comfort. Nietzsche, with his relentless gaze, didn't just challenge morality. He tore through the fragile veil that hides the raw, uncomfortable truth about human suffering and power. He saw how the language of victimhood is a seductive lie, a velvet noose that tightens around your neck the more you clutch it, whispering that your pain is what makes you special, what makes you worthy of attention, yet stealing the very thing you crave. Freedom. This philosophy isn't for the faint-hearted. It demands you look into your own abyss and recognize that the chains you feel are forged by your insistence on holding on to pain as identity. Nietzsche's will to power is not a call to dominate others or drown in cruelty. It is the call to wrest control back from the narrative of victimhood, to say, "No, I am not my wounds. I am not the sum of my suffering." It is a declaration that the essence of your being transcends your trauma, that your existence is not a plea for pity, but a battle cry for your own reclamation. Yet, the most terrifying part of this truth is how deeply ingrained the victim role is, not just in you, but in the society that surrounds you. We are conditioned to seek validation through our suffering because it feels safer than the unknown freedom that comes from owning your power. Freedom demands responsibility. Responsibility to face the void without the crutch of blame, without the cloak of helplessness. It demands you stare down the ghosts of your past and refuse to let them dictate your worth. But what if you don't? What if you choose to live in that darkness, to wrap yourself tighter in the identity of victim? Nietzsche would say you have surrendered the very thing that makes you human, the ability to create meaning beyond circumstance, to forge yourself anew in the fire of your own will. You become a shadow of yourself, haunted not by external forces, but by the internal chains you refuse to break. There is a bitter irony here. The more you hold on to victimhood, the more you become trapped in it, until you are not a person, but a symbol. A cautionary tale of suffering that neither frees nor empowers. You live in perpetual darkness, not because the world demands it, but because you allow your own narrative to imprison you. Nietzsche's darkest truth is that you are the architect of your own cage, and only you hold the key. To break free, you must embrace the terror of self-overcoming, the agonizing, lonely process of shedding every excuse, every justification, every whispered plea for sympathy. You must become the warrior of your own existence, wielding your will like a weapon, cutting through the lies you've told yourself for so long. This is the true meaning of power, not the power over others, but the power over yourself. The audacity to say, "I am more than what has happened to me." In this darkness lies the possibility of rebirth, not through denial or repression, but through ruthless acceptance and fierce defiance. Nietzsche challenges you not to drown in the abyss, but to rise from it, bloodied but unbowed, claiming your place not as a victim, but as a sovereign being, unshakable, unyielding, and free. Think about how easy it is nowadays to drown in the noise of social media, the endless scrolling, the curated highlights, the filtered pain served like a badge of honor. Everyone's competing to showcase their struggle, their trauma, their heartbreak, as if the louder you scream about your wounds, the more valid you become. But what if I told you that this digital stage, this virtual theater of victimhood, is actually a cage disguised as a spotlight? You're trapped in a loop where your pain is not a bridge to healing, but a performance that keeps you stuck, unable to break free, unable to grow beyond the roles you're playing for likes, shares, and hollow sympathy. In the age of constant connection, the illusion of being heard and understood is seductive. Yet beneath the filtered selfies and viral sob stories lies a raw, aching isolation. You're surrounded by people, yet you feel invisible. lost in a crowd that only knows you through your suffering. The irony is brutal. The more you broadcast your pain, the more you feed the algorithms that commodify it, turning your deepest wounds into clicks and views. Your anguish becomes content, and in that transformation, your power slips away. Modern culture sells you the lie that validation comes from external approval, that your worth is measured by how many times your story is shared, how many people comment, "Me too," how many strangers nod in silent recognition. But this validation is a poison, slowly corroding your sense of self until you can no longer distinguish who you are from the narrative you've created around your pain. You become a product, a brand, an avatar of suffering, optimized for maximum emotional engagement. Nietzsche's darkest truth echoes louder than ever. You are not your trauma. You don't have to tattoo your pain across your identity like a permanent mark. True freedom comes when you stop performing your victimhood for an audience and start owning your story on your terms. Quietly, fiercely, unapologetically. It's about reclaiming your agency in a world that desperately wants to keep you dependent on pity and distraction. Healing in this modern age requires a brutal honesty, not just with others, but with yourself. It means turning off the screen, stepping away from the noise, and sitting alone with your shadows without the crutch of external validation. It means rejecting the narrative of helplessness sold to you by sensational headlines, toxic influencers, and the relentless churn of tragic news cycles. You have the power to rewrite your script, to be the author of your own life rather than a character in someone else's story. But this choice isn't comfortable. It demands courage to face your fears when there's no applause, no retweets, no public affirmation. It means confronting the silence where true strength is forged. The kind of strength that doesn't need an audience, that survives in the cracks between the spotlight and the shadow. So ask yourself, will you continue to be a performer in the endless theater of victimhood, feeding the machine that profits from your pain? Or will you step off the stage, shatter the illusion, and build a life defined not by suffering, but by resilience, by quiet power, by freedom? This is the real rebellion, choosing to be whole in a fractured world, to be silent and strong in an age of noise, to be unseen but unbroken. The choice is yours. What will you decide? You have been taught to believe that your value lies somewhere in the wounds you carry, that your scars, visible or invisible, are the credentials to your suffering, the very proof that you deserve empathy, attention, or some hollow validation from a world that thrives on your weakness. And yet, what they never tell you, what they dare not admit, is that this trap of victimhood is the most cunning cage of all. One that imprisons your spirit not with bars, but with your own belief that to matter, you must be broken, bruised and beaten down, enough for others to notice you, for others to feel obligated to hold your hand as you limp through the wreckage of your past. And in this cruel performance, where pain becomes currency and misery a spotlight, you slowly lose the ability to stand on your own, to see yourself beyond the role scripted for you by a culture addicted to tragedy and survival. Because the truth, dark and unyielding, is that you do not need to carry the weight of victimhood to be heard. You do not have to parade your suffering like a flag to demand love or respect. And you most certainly do not have to wear your wounds as armor, fooling yourself into thinking that your pain justifies your existence or your place in the world, when in reality, the longer you cling to this identity, the more you become a ghost haunting your own life, forever tethered to a past that no longer serves you, a past that thrives only as long as you feed it with your attention and your tears. And yet, society, with its ceaseless appetite for stories of despair, encourages this cycle, pushing you to identify with your brokenness so you remain dependent, vulnerable and easily controlled, because a world that profits from your silence and your pain has no interest in your healing or your empowerment. It wants you locked in the narrative of victimhood, wrapped in endless excuses, so that you never question who you could be if you dared to break free from the chains of self-pity and expectation. So here is the harshest realization you must face. You are not broken beyond repair, but you have been conditioned to believe you are, and this belief is the greatest prison you will ever inhabit, one that convinces you to settle for less, to hide in the shadows of what happened to you, rather than rise into the fierce light of who you can become, because it is easier to wear the mask of suffering than to risk the terrifying unknown of reclaiming your power, your voice, and your freedom. You must understand that to be free, you have to stop defining yourself by what was done to you and start defining yourself by what you choose to do with your life now. Because clinging to victimhood is not rebellion or resistance. It is surrender, a giving away of your agency to the very forces that seek to keep you small, silent, and invisible, and breaking free demands, a kind of courage most are never taught. The courage to confront your pain without using it as a shield. The courage to acknowledge your scars without letting them dictate your worth. The courage to stand alone in a world that profits from your submission and say, I refuse to be owned by my suffering. This realization will hurt. It will tear apart the comforting lies you have built around yourself. It will challenge every excuse, every justification, every self-pitying whisper in your mind. But only through this pain can you reclaim the power that was never truly lost, only buried beneath the weight of expectation and fear. Because no matter how deep the darkness around you, the spark of your own unyielding spirit can never be extinguished. And once you awaken to that, you can never go back to being the victim they want you to be. You've carried the weight of others' definitions for too long, swallowed their judgments, and accepted their version of your story as your own. But the final revelation you must confront is this. Your suffering does not define your identity, and the chains that bind you were never forged by your past. They were hammered in by your consent, your silence, and your unwillingness to rise beyond what has been done to you. This is not a call for denial or erasure of your wounds, but a summons to recognize that you are not the sum of your pain, and that the power to rewrite your narrative has always been within your grasp, even when it felt impossible to reach, buried under layers of fear, doubt, and the voices that told you you were broken beyond repair. You must see that every moment you have spent clinging to victimhood is a moment spent handing over your power to those who benefit from your submission. Whether they are people in your life, society at large, or the insidious voice inside your own head that convinces you that you are too damaged to fight back, too broken to heal, too lost to find your way out of the darkness. And yet, this is a lie so profound, it poisons your very essence. Because the human spirit is not fragile. It is ferocious, and even the deepest wounds can become the source of strength when you stop feeding them with despair and start feeding them with the fierce light of your own choice. When you decide to stand not in spite of your pain, but because of it, transforming every scar into a badge of your resilience and every hardship into the soil where your power grows. In this revelation, you understand that you are not the victim of your circumstances. You are the survivor of your choices, even the ones made in pain, even the ones made in fear, because survival is not about passivity. It is about resistance, and resistance begins with the refusal to allow your past to dictate your future, with the refusal to be shackled by narratives that demand you remain small, quiet, and broken, and with the refusal to believe that you are anything less than the architect of your own destiny, the author of a story that no one else gets to write for you. This is the fierce awakening when you realize that your scars do not mark the end of your journey but the map for where you must go next, that your darkest moments are not your prison walls, but the gates to a freedom forged in fire and tempered by suffering. This is the moment when you stop seeking permission to exist, to thrive, to be unapologetically yourself, because you realize that no external validation can give you what you have always held within yourself, the power to rise, to claim your space, and to live beyond the shadows of your pain. And though this truth may terrify you, because it demands accountability and courage you may not feel ready to claim, it also liberates you from the prison built of self-doubt and dependence, setting you on a path that no one else can walk for you, but only you can forge for yourself. a path paved with the fierce resolve to no longer ask for mercy or approval, but to take what is yours simply by existing. And so, with this final revelation comes a reckoning, a choice, to remain shackled to the comfort of victimhood, wrapped in the familiar chains of suffering and excuse, or to shatter those chains and step into the abyss of freedom where your true power lies, raw and untamed, waiting for you to claim it, not as a prize for your pain, but as a birthright of your existence. Because you are not broken, you are not defined by what happened to you, and you are far more dangerous and radiant than the world has ever dared to imagine. A force that cannot be contained or diminished by the cruelty you endured, or the labels you refused to shed. This is not just a moment of clarity. It is the moment your soul has been waiting for, the moment you realize that the darkest truths do not bind you, they set you free. If only you have the courage to face them and refuse the role they have cast for you. Because once you see this, once you claim this, you become unstoppable, and the victim they want you to be will finally become the survivor you were always meant to be. Standing tall, not in spite of everything, but because of everything, fierce and unbreakable, rewriting your story on your own terms. You stand now on the edge of everything you once believed was unchangeable, the precipice between the self that has been battered and bruised by the world's cruelty and the self that is waiting, hungry, fierce, and ready to break free from the invisible chains forged by pain, fear, and the false comfort of victimhood. This moment, charged with the weight of all you have endured and all you have yet to become, is a crucible where your true nature is tested and revealed, not by the stories others have told about you, but by the unyielding spirit within that refuses to be crushed, silenced, or diminished any longer, demanding instead that you rise with every fractured piece intact and more powerful than before. For in this dark and lonely place, where shadows of doubt whisper lies meant to keep you tethered to suffering, you must make a choice not just between surrender and resistance, but between fading quietly into the background of your own existence or exploding with the brutal clarity of someone who has finally seized their own truth and refused to let go. This is the climax of your internal battle, the moment where the false narratives you have been sold, the voices that convinced you to shrink yourself, and the invisible puppeteers who profit from your pain collide with the undeniable truth that you are neither fragile nor defeated, but a force of nature, capable of destroying the prisons built around you and constructing new realms where your identity is no longer dictated by trauma, but shaped by triumph. It is here, in this charged silence before the storm of self-empowerment, that you confront the darkest question. Will you continue to live in the shadows, hiding behind excuses and the comforting weight of blame? Or will you burn through the night with the fire of someone who understands that survival is not enough, that thriving is the only acceptable response to a world that tried to make you small? To choose thriving is to embrace the terrifying freedom of radical responsibility, the bitter pill that demands you stop waiting for salvation, apology, or acknowledgement from others and start demanding those things from yourself. To own your scars, not as marks of victimhood, but as emblems of survival and catalysts for rebirth. It is the recognition that the world may never validate your pain, may never understand your struggle, but you owe yourself the mercy of refusing to be tethered to a narrative written by others. Instead, scripting your own epic with a pen dipped in resilience, courage, and the raw, unfiltered truth of your existence. This act of rebellion, this refusal to be a casualty of your past, is the most dangerous and liberating thing you can do because it robs those who want to see you broken of their power and gives you back your greatest weapon, the fierce, unapologetic ownership of your life. And so, this dramatic conclusion is not the end of your story, but the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where you no longer seek permission to live fully, love deeply, or stand unapologetically in your own skin, but claim these things fiercely as a birthright stolen from you only if you allow it, reclaimed only through the relentless act of choosing yourself every single day, even when it hurts, even when it feels impossible. This is your reckoning and your liberation wrapped into one. The moment when victimhood dies and the survivor, the warrior, the architect of their own fate, rises like a dark phoenix from the ashes of every lie you were told and every chain you broke. Remember, the world will try to drag you back into the shadows, to remind you of your pain and limitations. But armed with this revelation, this fire in your soul, you are untouchable, unbreakable, and unstoppable. This is your moment to step into the darkness, not as a prisoner, but as a conqueror, to shatter the silence with the roar of your own existence, and to declare with every fiber of your being that you are no longer a victim. You are the embodiment of power, reclaimed, a force no one can ever silence again. You have now heard the truth that many refuse to face, the uncomfortable reality that the role of the victim is not something you are born into, but a performance you are invited to repeat by a world eager to keep you small, silent, and confined within the prison walls of your own despair. And here is where the choice stands stark before you. Continue to dwell in the shadows of helplessness, a place where your pain is currency, but your power is surrendered, or rise. Rise with a fury so undeniable that even the darkness recoils, a rebellion not just against those who would keep you down, but against every whisper of doubt you have ever believed about your worth. To rise is to stare unflinchingly into the abyss of your own fears, to face the ghosts of trauma and self-loathing that have long held dominion over your mind, to dismantle the carefully constructed narrative of victimhood piece by piece until all that remains is raw, unfiltered truth. It is not an easy path. The climb is steep, and the wounds you uncover may burn anew. But this fire is the crucible of transformation, forging strength from the ashes of brokenness. No one else can do this for you. The world waits for your collapse, but the moment you claim your power is the moment the script breaks and a new story begins. One written by your own hands, one where you are not a casualty, but a warrior. This is the revolution of the self, a quiet uprising within the chambers of your heart and mind, where true change begins. The enemy is not external, but internal. The lingering beliefs, the self-imposed chains, the comfort found in familiar pain that masquerades as safety. To reject victimhood is to reject those lies and, in their place, embrace the terrifying freedom of owning your story fully, without apology or excuses. It means that when despair tries to seduce you with its false promise of surrender, you will instead summon a strength that defies logic. A resilience born not from ease, but from the very struggle you once feared. If these words stir something deep inside you, a flicker of rebellion, a spark of hope, do not let that flame flicker and die in silence. Affirm your refusal to be a victim by an act as simple and yet as profound as pressing like on this message, a symbolic gesture of commitment to your own awakening. Subscribe to this journey, not just to these words, but to the relentless reminder that strength is a choice you make every day, that freedom is earned in the refusal to stay small. Share this message with those who still wander in darkness, those who need to hear that the power to rise resides within them, waiting to be claimed. Because the more of us who rise, the louder our collective voice becomes, shattering the illusions meant to keep us isolated and powerless. Together, we form a force unstoppable by fear, doubt, or oppression, an unyielding testament to the human spirit's capacity to reclaim, rebuild, and become unbreakable. So rise now. Not because it will be easy, not because the world demands it, but because your very existence deserves to be a declaration of defiance and hope. Rise. Because the only thing more terrifying than the darkness around you is never knowing the full extent of the light burning within.